I want to begin our time together in learning how to listen to God, to self, to others, to creation, with this ancient Hebrew story about a man named Moses. So we get this story from the book of Exodus, and the writer of Exodus tells us that Moses was in the wilderness. And in some ways, we could even say that he was in the wilderness both literally and figuratively. See, Moses was born at a time when the Egyptian empire was in a xenophobic rage at the prospect of a class of minorities that would soon become a majority. The minorities were thus enslaved, and a state-sponsored program of genocide was initiated to control them. And all of this was done out of fear and to instill fear. These same tactics of empire are used even today. See, there were midwives, because there's always these women who stand up to the empire. But there were these midwives who stood up to the Egyptian empire, and they were committing these acts of civil disobedience. And there was one Hebrew mother who acted in secrecy to attempt to save her baby boy, because the Egyptian empire was killing off all of the boys. And after trying to hide him for about 3 months, she put him in a basket and set him to float down a river. And as it turned out, one of Pharaoh's own daughters saw the peculiar basket, pulled it up out of the water, and as it were, the child's mother had sent a girl to watch where the basket would go. And so this girl, seeing what was happened, suggested that she find a Hebrew mother to nurse this son, this baby. So the baby was, of course, named Moses and was returned to his mother for nursing. And the mother's joy was only short-lived, as the boy was to be returned to Pharaoh's household as an adopted son. So Moses knew his family heritage. He knew he came from the Hebrew people, and he saw that his own people were enslaved, and he saw the brutality of Pharaoh's racism. And witnessing the brutality firsthand, he lashed out in a passionate rage and killed an Egyptian man. And there were witnesses to the murder, and Moses was now a fugitive running for his life. So he was in this wilderness, both literally and figuratively. And actually the writer of Exodus even tells us that Moses was at the edge of the desert, and in another translation puts it, beyond the wilderness. Moses had turned to a pastoral life of shepherding with countless hours under a desert sky. And don't you think that he was probably questioning things the same way that we might? Asking questions like, who am I? Who are my people? What am I doing here? Who is God? And the narrator tells us that Moses had come to the mountain of God, which was called Horeb. And this is the first time that Horeb is actually mentioned in the Jewish scriptures, but eventually it figures prominently in the near future as Israel wanders in their own wilderness time. Moses didn't know what was in store for him, but perhaps he knew that there was something special about that mountain, because he was paying attention. He was listening. See, he saw a flame. Now, for many of us, we may have just seen the flame and continued on our way, because brush fires from lightning strike on a mountainside doesn't really sound all that uncommon. But Moses was looking for something more. In the typical theology of the day, see, deities were limited in their power to certain geographic areas. and places in the wilderness were outside of the bounds of the gods, even perhaps seen as devoid of gods. For most, tending your sheep in the wilderness would not have been an occasion for an encounter with God. But Moses was looking and listening for something more. The writer of Exodus tells us that the burning bush was a messenger of God. Other translations say that it was an angel, and that something more was happening, and Moses turned aside to look. That turning aside, it seems like such a simple act. It doesn't seem like an act of courage or great faith, but it was an act of awareness, an act of searching, an act of being open for an encounter with the divine, and God took notice. See, it was written this way in the ancient text. When the Lord saw that he had turned aside to see, God called him out of the bush. So one has to ask, would God have called Moses if he didn't turn aside? Moses paid attention. Moses was listening. And God called to him, and that place that was beyond the wilderness became holy ground. It was not a temple designed to house and in a way control the presence of God. It was not mediated through a priest or clergy telling us how we ought to relate to God or to experience God even on our behalf. This was not a person who went through years of extensive training and education in who the God of the Hebrew people was, or who had a set of sacred texts in order to understand this God. This was a person in the wilderness who was searching, maybe even didn't know what he was searching for, and he found himself standing on holy ground. Have you had something similar happen to you? Have you ever felt like you heard some kind of audible voice from God, or knew that you were standing on something like holy ground? We might typically look with suspicion on a person who hears voices, right? And I think we would rightly be suspicious of someone claiming with a bold authority that they have heard directly from God. See, if you're like me, you would be suspicious because you've seen person after person claim to be speaking the very words of God, yet at the same time, they were creating an unhealthy and even toxic environment of manipulation, harassment, power, abuse. And yet, we're still drawn to these experiences in our lives when something beyond us seems to speak or to call. Maybe we can't put quotation marks around it. We can't put specific words to it and attribute it to God, but we know that something communicated to us deep in our soul when we were mesmerized maybe by a sunset. Or we knew something was communicating to us when a spark of life was just inflamed, when we had that conversation with a friend. We know that when we stole away for a moment of stillness and quiet, that something deep within us was welling up, almost screaming to say that this is what we were made for. These moments may get called different things, but one common name that is given to these experiences is the name of God. The Jewish scriptures contain a creation poem that describes God speaking and creation coming into being. See, if we understand this poetry correctly, then it means that we are fundamentally creatures who listen. We're made to listen for this creative voice in the world around us, in others, both our human and our more than human neighbors, and even listen for that voice in ourselves. See, in our modern world, listening, just simple listening, is a revolutionary act. Because first, it means that we, at least for the moment, put aside our own agendas, our ideas, our goals, our busyness, even our beliefs. And we let go of our attachments to these things that have come to define who we are. Because it's these attachments that cause so much suffering and pain in our own lives. Listening causes us to let go of those attachments. Listening dismantles these attachments, allowing something truly beautiful and creative to emerge. The second way that listening is a revolutionary act is that it allows for something other than the dominant narratives to be voiced. How many of our own agendas, ideas, and beliefs that we cling to are actually ours? Have they not been shaped by the narratives in society around us? How much of our beliefs are actually then reverberations of an echo chamber that we find ourselves in? See, listening is a revolutionary act because it causes some other voice to come forth. So in the story of Moses, that voice came from beyond the wilderness, beyond where God was supposed to be heard. It came in the unexpected places. It came from a burning bush. So when we listen in these unexpected areas of listening deep within ourselves, listening to others, when we listen to creation, we open the doors for revolutionary creativity to emerge in us and in the world. This is going to take practice. So over the course of the next 6 weeks, I want you to carve out these regular practices. The first one is to create a time of stillness. Let's just try 15 minutes. And I'm calling it stillness as opposed to silence or quiet because I realize some of our houses and homes are just not quiet. But perhaps we could find a place of stillness. Maybe we've got to shut and lock the bedroom door. But a place of stillness. Because it's in this stillness that we can let all of the activities and the busyness just calm. Just to be calm for 15 minutes. And that's where we're going to start to learn how to listen. That's where these attachments begin to be dismantled. The second practice I want you to take on is a sit spot. A sit spot. Now what I mean by this is locating a place outside, outdoors. Or if that's not feasible, a place next to a window that gives you a view to the outdoors. See, we're entering into this time where we're just at the edge of springtime. In these 6 weeks, we're going to be right into the midst of springtime. There's going to be lots of changes going on outside, and listening for creation is an important skill and practice. And we're going to find this sit spot that we're going to return to every week, and we're just going to notice what is changing. We don't need to come away with a big epiphany, a big transcendent experience, achieve enlightenment. That's not the goal. We're just going to notice what changes from week to week. So those are the practices I want you to carve out. And next week, I hope you'll join with me as we start to uncover biases that get in the way of us being able to listen. So come on back for that, and we'll have some more practices for learning how to listen, how to live compassionately with others.